Hello, Rainbow Church community. Never in my wildest imagination could I envision talking to you as a congregation from my spare bedroom webcam, let alone planning for a congregational Zoom this Sunday. This has been an unprecedented year, to say the least. That said, I am very appreciative of all that continues to be accomplished with the mission of our church during this time. It is truly a blessing to work with such a dedicated group of people that seek to further the mission of our church, which is to seek to serve the spiritual and material needs of this and the larger community. I want to give you a brief timeline and highlight the work of one of our groups today, the Early Street House Task Force. In August of 2019, the deacons were charged with creating a more formal rental agreement with the caretakers of the MBS house. This, coupled with the fact that we would find out we were not getting any new MBSers for the coming year, and some looming repairs that were needing to be addressed, led to the determination that the house should be vacated and closed down by November. Later in December, after much deliberation and a report from the MBS Support Board to Council, it was determined that RMC would discontinue its partnership with the Mennonite Mission Network and the National Mennonite Voluntary Service Program. At this point, Council asked the outreach coordinator, Ben Parker-Suter, to facilitate a brainstorming session to determine what might be done with the Early Street House. This was done back on February 2nd of this year. Following this congregational session, Council, at its February 27th meeting, approved a task force to discern how the Early Street House fits into our congregation's vision and mission. Task force members included Peggy Coriel, Karen Gearing-Hostetler, Ken Gertz, and Natasha Van Dyke. Also included were representatives Mark Unruh from Stewardship Committee, Todd Zahner from the trustees, and Ben Parker-Suter, outreach coordinator and staff liaison, with Ruth Harder in as ex officio. Despite the pandemic that has created havoc in all of our lives, this group has continued to work diligently. I want to express my sincere appreciation from the council and our church congregation to this group for their efforts. I think you will find their report thorough and thought-provoking. Thank you, Early Street Task Force.
Hello, everybody. Following up on Rod's comments, just a little bit more about our task force. Our task force has met 6 times by Zoom since March 12th. At our first meeting, the following guiding principles were established. First, that whatever options we came up with, that there would be no cost to the church. Secondly, however the house would be used would function independently of church staff. And finally, that we would look for ways in which it would benefit the community. The 2 options that we'll be presenting for your consideration are, first, to sell the house, and secondly, to lease the house to Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network to provide transitional housing and housing support services for persons with mental health needs. In addition to these 2 options, there were a variety of possibilities that we considered. Some of the options that did not meet the criteria that we established were housing for families of KU Medical Center patients, an Airbnb, the facility being a rental house with the church as landlord, keeping the house and returning it to future use as a parsonage, and perhaps as an annex for church storage needs and community use. In each of these instances, there would have been additional cost to the church, and most likely church staff would have been involved. Other options that were explored that aren't feasible include looking into the possibility of a community land trust, housing for transgender teens needing a shelter, and contact with United Methodist clergy. Ruth contacted both Gary Schrag and Kristen Stoneking to get some feedback and information on how Methodist congregations and conferences may be currently using their property. We also talked with the executive director and CEO of Hillcrest Transitional Housing, about the possibility of the house being used as transitional housing for homeless individuals. And we learned from them that they were more interested in apartments than in a house that had, say, 5 bedrooms. In addition to these, we explored the possibility of the house becoming a museum. Exploration was done with the Strawberry Hill Museum and the Quindaro Museum, which are both house museums in Wyandotte County. We also looked into the possibility of the house taking on historical status and becoming listed in historical registers, whether at the local, state, or national level. We were very privileged to have Daniel Serta, a local urban planner and an individual who has worked a lot with historical preservation to consult with us on this. In looking at a summary or reflection of the house, the Early Street House has a distinguished history of service in the community as a church, as a parsonage, and as an MVS unit and guest house. It was a gift to our church, and with that, we have an obligation to be good stewards. There's a lot of sweat equity and volunteer hours that have been given in caring for it from members of our church. And I think we all probably have some emotional ties to the house. Regardless of which option is chosen, there will be a new relationship to the house. Thinking in the future, if the house falls into disrepair, that would be a significant loss to the neighborhood. Finally, how can the house best continue to be a meaningful presence in the Rosedale community?
Yeah, this is Todd Zahner, and next I'd like to share some detail on the 2 recommendations that the task force came up with that Karen just shared with you, and also talk a little bit about whether we sell the house or whether we lease the house to Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network. What's that look like in a little more detail? And if you have any questions along the way, please jot them down and we will address them later, and I'll talk about that at the end.
So what I'm going to talk about today is more about Wyandotte Center. So we, again, are the comprehensive community mental health center, and we have a variety of services that are available within the community to help meet the needs of residents of Wyandotte County. It's a pretty big continuum from intake services, crisis services, traditional outpatient services such as therapy or med clinic, and then our community-based services, which is typically case management. And really what I'm going to focus on is some of our community-based services, because the program that we're talking about today really encompasses that community spirit. And so some of the programs that we provide are permanent supportive housing programs. Our permanent supportive housing programs really are designed to provide a higher level of community-based service, more intensive services, if you will, to individuals who've struggled with housing. We have recently had some great conversations with some of your amazing leaders within the church, and they have invited us to look at the home that is currently owned by the church. One of the things that we were looking at the home for, though, was what we call some transitional housing opportunities. So again, like mental health services, sometimes housing is also on a continuum for individuals. You have some individuals who experience homelessness, and for the vast majority of folks, they can find housing and they're pretty successful in their housing. And we do have a team that actually helps folks who are homeless find housing. Then there is a group of individuals sometimes, though, that need a little bit more than that. Going straight from no housing to housing can sometimes be a challenge for those individuals. Sometimes they need a little bit more support in their journey to get there. And so what we're talking about for this program in particular is a transitional housing program. And what that means is basically an interim plan as that person's moving forward with their journey. What this is not a homeless shelter. So this is not a situation where multiple people come in and out. They stay there for a short amount of time and then move on. This is also not a crisis facility. This would not be someone who's coming in a crisis necessarily, who needs a lot of stabilization. This program would really be designed for maybe about 5 individuals is what we would be looking at. These are individuals 18 and over who do have significant mental health symptoms. Their mental health symptoms have provided barriers to them being successful in housing before. So to be able to get to that next journey, they just need a little bit more support. So this program would provide them that support. The average length of stay we would be looking at would be about 45 to 90 days. So this really wouldn't be an environment where a lot of people are coming in and out. They would primarily be staying there, learning additional skill sets. Some of the skill sets might be managing their own mental health symptoms, might be learning some more skill sets for how to be successful in housing, such as preparing meals, or just being able to get along with neighbors. In addition to that, they would have additional supports in place as well. So the house would be staffed 24/7. There would never be a time where a staff member was not there. But even in addition to that, we would be looking at some additional supports that that person would have, such as case management, therapy, medication management, and crisis services. In addition to that support that they would receive, would be looking for housing. What is that next step for them to move them into a permanent housing situation? We truly believe that most people experience recovery by being in their own apartment with supports in place to help them be successful. And that's really our primary goal as a community mental health center. The reason why we really love this house is the setup was very nice for that. Those big open rooms allowed for space for people to be able to congregate, so that they could do groups. They could just, again, socially interact with each other, but then the bedrooms would allow privacy and private space. It also was, the way it was set up, kind of being in the circle and then the upstairs part, it allowed for staff to be available and to be able to see different parts of the home pretty readily. The lot that it sits on has great outside area. Folks can be able to go outside, the garden being across the street. It just allows for, again, different opportunities to be able to work on those skill sets. And then, of course, the park down the street. And the setting within the neighborhood is also a really nice setting for this. Those are some of the reasons why we really loved the house for a project like this. But I think, again, it also allows us to be in the community more. It allows us to have that presence. And the individuals that we'd be looking for this services are going to be individuals who might have struggled in their housing before. They currently do not have housing, and they could be individuals who are coming from higher levels of care. So they could be folks who have stabilized and are ready to discharge from the hospital. They could be coming from nursing facilities, or they could be just some folks that we know within our system are coming from our crisis stabilization unit at our SI. However, we're also going to make sure that we do a process of reviewing that person's symptoms, their history, to make sure that they're going to be a good fit for this program. Folks that would be a good fit are, one, folks who are wanting this level of care. They want this service. They want to be engaged in mental health treatment, and they're really wanting to get to that next step. We would be looking at anybody, if they had any serious charges, especially aggression. Those would not be individuals that we would be bringing into this program. Our primary goals would be to make sure that this person is receiving the mental health support that they need. We would also be making sure that it's a safe environment for them and a safe environment for others who are in the house. And so those are a few of the things that we would be going through. They would have some of the more significant mental health diagnoses. So some of the folks who might be coming in here might be folks who struggle with symptoms such as hearing voices, seeing things that others might not see, significant depression, or some mania, which is where folks kind of be at those higher elevated moods. The advantage of this kind of program, though, is, again, it's going to be staffed with mental health services 24/7 with additional services readily available should someone be in a crisis, so that we can intervene quickly to help that person receive the level of care they would need to be able to manage their crisis. So right now, between Wyandotte Center and Rainbow Mennonite Church, we are certainly in the exploratory stages of this program. We know that there's a lot of conversations that need to happen both at the church level, the community level, and Wyandotte Center. And so right now at Wyandotte Center, we're having those conversations. Is this a program that we feel like could fit the needs of our community and our consumers? Is it a financially sustainable program for us as an organization? And then does our board support it? So that's kind of where we're at in the process, is we're having those conversations. And I know that you all at the church will be having similar conversations. Is this what you would envision for the home? Does it fit your mission as a church? And all of those conversations. So I'm hopeful that we'll have more conversations just about what that looks like. And then we can also look at the community as well. And as a mental health organization, we are happy to answer any questions, be a part of different conversations, and not just with those conversations with the church, but also the community. Sometimes it's only understandable that people might have questions about a program like this. Or what would it look like? So we are happy to be involved in those, answer questions, and talk about what our vision is.
In the process of exploring possibilities with Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network, the task force has appreciated the input of Allie Mabry. Allie lives in the Rosedale area and currently chairs the Rosedale Development Association board, and she also is a former employee of Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network.
The details of that lease, I want to share a few things because I know people will have questions about this. We might as well get them out there for you to think about. First of all, we would enter into a 1-year lease with 30-day exit clauses available to both parties. So if it doesn't work out for the church, doesn't work out for Wyandotte, we can both give 30 days notice and exit. All the utilities and lawn care would transfer to them. They would pay for that. Insurance coverage would be held by both parties. The lease would create income to the church, but that income would be used to cover the church expenses like insurance that I've mentioned, but it would also be used for some pre-lease early repairs that we've identified that need to be done. We need to do some things before they would go into the house, but primarily to build a long-term repair fund for major things that might happen, like needing a new roof, a new furnace, or even major appliances. So the intent is that's where the proceeds of the lease would be used for, lease payment. The lease amount is meant to cover those expenses and not to profit from. We've run this by the task force and by council, and everyone agrees that really we should not profit from this. We should just use it to cover our expenses and build those funds to take care of the needs. Also, it's a way that we can feel good about through this option giving back to the community, which was one of our guiding principles as a task force. There would be a trustee that would need to be required to be a contact with Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network to handle the major issues that come up. The trustees would need to consult and make sure they look at the lease, get it all legal, and also handle the annual renewals of the lease. And the trustees would also conduct house checks regularly that would be written into the lease, maintain visibility of the house and how it's being utilized. The task force came up with the following proposal as to kind of how it should be sold as follows. So we think we should work with a market analysis and a realtor to determine a selling price. And that would be approved by the trustees and the church council. And then first, we would like to offer it for sale to church members, interested church members, for a period of time. And after that, secondly, we would like to offer it for sale on the open market through a multiple listing like any real estate transaction. But to sell the house, the task force came up with a couple of stipulations that will be written into the way it's sold. First, a right of first refusal. So if the house is sold to someone and eventually it's resold, the church will have a right of first refusal to buy it back. So there would be an opportunity to get the house back, and you can do that. The second stipulation would be an owner occupancy clause, and that would mean that we would really like someone that buys it to live in it and not turn it into a rental property. So that was the preference of the task force and the recommendation that's being made on the selling option. Next, as you've heard about Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network and how that option can be a way we can use the house and continue to use the house to be a benefit to the community and the church outreach. Also, I'd like to talk a little bit about selling and what could the benefits be to the church if we sell the house. There are some benefits there as well. So this list of benefits were developed by some of the comments from the task force that we've talked about, some of the trustees and some of the other people that have been involved in council, etc. So first of all, the sale of the house could lead to proceeds that we will receive because we don't own anything on the house. And that could basically benefit of the financial health of our church. And it can be used in numerous ways, those proceeds. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute, how we suggested those proceeds would be distributed. Selling would truly eliminate the church staff involvement, as well as trustees, treasurer, and numerous other committees that might still be a little bit involved. There would be no budget line item for the house in our budget anymore to discuss. There would be no church becoming a landlord. With the other option, we would become a landlord, but for a good cause. There would be, selling would create no risk for these maintenance surprises that we just don't know may come with this older home. Even though we would plan for those, we would mitigate that by selling. We would remove the house program potential liabilities. Not that there would be any liabilities, but we would need to be covered for liabilities. And that liability reduction would be truly a reduction in our church budget because we wouldn't have to buy insurance. There would be no risk to us of neighbors perhaps being concerned about the house purpose. Don't know that that's going to be an issue, but it could be an issue. We would truly not have to visit the house situation again until it was offered for sale back to us again when it was sold. So the house would really kind of leave our roles and responsibilities. The congregation, offering it for sale to a congregational member first could be a really positive benefit. We could have a congregational member living in the neighborhood that could bring a new relationship, a new spark to the neighborhood and to the church perhaps. Likewise, if you sell it on the open market, that new neighbor could do the same thing. We could divert our focus, some of the focus that we all give to the house now, or some of us give, we could divert that to a stronger focus on our other outreach issues. And I think we just need to ask ourselves personally, there's a couple options here, and on the house sale, we've been a caretaker for this house for over 40 years. We've talked about this as a task force. Has the house basically served its purpose, and is it time to move on? You need to ask yourself that question, just like you need to ask questions about the Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network option as well. So let me proceed now and talk a little bit about the house proceeds that I mentioned earlier. How would those be distributed if we did sell the house and get proceeds? The recommendations of the task force, and this needs to be finalized and approved by the stewardship committee and approved by council, and probably the outreach committee needs to look at this too. But we've talked a lot about the proceeds being used to just pay down the mortgage. We talked about the proceeds being used to build up the endowment fund that the church is working on. We've also talked about the proceeds, or a part of the proceeds could be used to go back towards outreach. And finally, we've talked about a blend or a mixture of all those three, of maybe some of it should go to mortgage, some of it should go to endowment, and some of it should go to continue to bolster our outreach. So that has to be, that comes a final recommendation from the stewardship committee, and they're working on that. So in closing, I'd sure like to thank you for listening to the task force recommendation on the Early Street house. There is a decision that's approaching us, and we're asking you to participate in voting whether we sell the house or whether we use it through a lease with Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network. This was meant to be an informational meeting and to gather your thoughts, and hopefully you are writing down some questions, because we do plan to answer your questions in an upcoming meeting on the 26th at Congregational Call. And we'd actually like to receive those questions in advance, and we'd like you to send them to me, and Ruth will be showing you here on the screen my email and phone number. You can call and talk about it, or you can send me an email. Then we'll be prepared to answer those questions in that congregational meeting and speed up that meeting a little bit. So please send them in advance if you would, if you thought of them as we went through this. So anyway, please join us and listen and share on the 26th. And we will be seeing a vote very soon. Now, for me to just one moment put on my trustee hat, I'd like to ask anybody that's donated anything to the house or loaned anything to the house that they may want back, they need to contact myself or any of the trustees, because we're getting ready to disposition some of those items. So please, if you have anything in mind, we'd ask for you to give us a call on that. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on this task force, but being a representative of both the trustees and the task force, I've done my best to try to remain neutral on both of these options and look at a lot of great options and work with a lot of people that have a great history with the church. And I'm really want to make sure everyone understands that I'm not trying to sway the church one way or another, just present what we have put together as a task force. Thanks.
The job of the task force was not to recommend one or the other option, but to present the two options. And so we've tried to do that as fairly as possible. And so it would not be accurate to see that Todd represents one and I represent the other, and that we're recommending in that way, but that we're both just doing our best to present two options for consideration by the congregation. You might be interested in a little bit of the history of the early street house. There were two Methodist churches that started in Rosedale in the late 1800s. In 1879, the Henning Avenue Methodist Church was organized, and the church was dedicated in 1880. And it was located on Henning Avenue, the first street immediate west of the railroad tracks on Southwest Boulevard. In 1907, this congregation decided to buy property and build a new building at the location of our current site at 1444 Southwest Boulevard. With that change, it became known as the First Methodist Episcopal Church of Rosedale, and the cornerstone was laid in 1907. At the same time, the Walnut Street Methodist Episcopal Church South organized in 1894, and the church building was constructed in 1900 at Walnut and Florence Streets, which now would be 37th Avenue and South Early Street. It was dedicated in 1901 and is the site of the Early Street House. For further information to why there were two churches, in 1844, the Methodist Church denomination split over slavery. This means that the Walnut Street Methodist Episcopal Church South was a pro-slavery church. The denomination reunited in 1939, which meant that the North, South, and a Progressive Methodist denomination joined together at that point. Not surprisingly then, in 1943, the First Methodist Episcopal Church of Rosedale and Walnut Street Methodist Episcopal Church South merged to become Rosedale Methodist Church. And in 1944, the Walnut Street Church building was deeded to Rosedale Methodist Church, and with the understanding it would be converted into a parsonage. Once converted to a parsonage, continued in that way until Rosedale United Methodist Church closed in 1994. And subsequently, the building was given to the Sharing Community in Rosedale, and the title was transferred to Rainbow Mennonite Church in 2008. In 1996, the MVS unit moved from the house on Ruby Avenue to the former parsonage. And then in December of 2019, the church council made the decision to close the MVS unit, which had also served as a guest house for several years.